Hello, everybody. So this is our next video lecture. The topic is imperialism. This is primarily taking place in the 1890s to the early 1900s. Make sure to pause the video to write down notes on every slide. There will also be some discussion questions presented in this video that we will talk about in class. So if there's a question, maybe plan out your answer so that you know what you want to say when we get together in Zoom class. Here we go. Imperialism is a type of foreign policy. Make sure you know what a foreign policy is and what a domestic policy is. A foreign policy is a government's strategy in dealing with other nations, hence the word foreign. Domestic policy are the government's plan to deal with stuff within our own country. So American policy, domestic policy, but foreign policy is how are we going to interact with other countries. Now, guys, our foreign policy has changed a lot over time. It's kind of like a roller coaster. Sometimes we are on the aggressive side. Sometimes we're on the let's just stay back. Sometimes our foreign policy changes because of a leader, and sometimes our foreign policy changes because of an event, and sometimes it just naturally changes over time. But here are some questions to think about when deciding what our foreign policy is going to be. How do we plan to work with other countries? Are we going to isolate us? Like, are we going to be alone and just focus on our own country? Will we focus on economic gains? So is foreign policy going to be just focused on what will make us economically strong? Are we going to have humanitarian ideas? Meaning, foreign policy doesn't have to be like a negative thing. Should we help other countries? Should we provide resources, aid, help to other nations? Are we going to intervene in other countries' issues? If there's a civil war happening in another country, are we going to get involved? If there's just a general war, like, I don't know, a world war, are we going to get involved? Do we want to assert our dominance? Do we want to make peace? Man, foreign policy encompasses so much. And you're going to obviously see a lot of changes in America based on how we become an imperialistic country and how that changes our foreign policy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these are just a couple types of foreign policy. Make sure you write them down. And we've been all of them. America, at one point or another, has been all of these types of foreign policy. We've definitely been isolationist. We've definitely been neutral, where we don't take part in wars with other nations. We have definitely shown diplomacy and exercised diplomacy, which means that we negotiate and discuss and have meetings and make compromises with other nations peacefully. We are definitely a part of groups that believe in collective security, which are groups of countries that work together against any nation that threatens their peace or security. Have you heard of the United Nations? And yes, we have been imperialistic, which means we have created an empire by dominating nations around us. So, imperialism sounds a lot like colonization. So you're going to see a lot of similarities, but there's just some minor differences. But if you're thinking to yourself that imperialism sounds like colonization, you're on the right track. Now, this is going to be one of the topics we talk about. I'll share some answers in this lecture, but one of the topics we're going to discuss in class is what has our foreign policy been in America up until this point? This point meaning the 1890s. So starting from George Washington's presidency to the 1890s, how has foreign policy in America changed? Are there any examples of how America has interacted with other countries? So make sure you have an answer ready for this question I'm actually going to be giving you credit in Zoom class for your answer to this question. So if you need to even ask a friend for help, look back at your notes. How has American foreign policy changed? What are some examples of America interacting with other countries? There's even going to be some answers in this lecture. So I don't know if you remember this man, George Washington. I think my 7th period, what do you call him? Washi G or Georgie W? I don't know. Our first president, George Washington, if you remember his farewell address, he actually warned the future leaders of America from entanglements and attachments with foreign countries. Do you remember that being a big theme of his farewell address? Well, he was really setting the foundation for what he believed should be our foreign policy, which is isolationism, which obviously means to be alone. He thought that as a baby country, legitimately a baby country, only 8 years old, that we were not ready to have any dominant foreign policy. We should not go into wars. If you remember that situation with Hamilton and Jefferson, with England and France, Washington was like, nope, we're going to be neutral. We're not going to help either of those people. George Washington, again, thinks that that was the best choice for a baby new country. Other presidents after him agreed with this idea of isolationism, one of those presidents being James Monroe. Do you remember the Monroe Doctrine? This doctrine basically told other nations that they cannot interfere with the Western Hemisphere. It also told those other nations in Europe that we would not interfere with them. So this whole don't touch my stuff, we won't touch your stuff kind of idea was presented in the Monroe Doctrine. And this is still isolationism. But now things have changed. Ladies and gentlemen, we're in the 1890s now. That was in the late 1700s, early 1800s. 100 years has passed. Our country has dealt with the most divisive issue that we had, which was slavery. So we've already had the Civil War, we've already had the Reconstruction era. The thing that was maybe making us weak, we've quote unquote dealt with that divisive issue. We've also had the Gilded Age. You guys know this one. The Gilded Age is a huge component to why our foreign policy is changing. Write that down. The Gilded Age is a huge reason why our foreign policy is changing, because there is a massive amount of industrial and economic advancement. You know this. We are changing as a country. We are growing up and we are getting stronger. The Progressive Era has also happened and is happening around the same time as this. We are getting positive reforms in our nation. So now, we are now the most economically prosperous than we have ever been. Since we are economically strong, there are some leaders that think it's time for America's foreign policy to change and adapt as well, which enters the age of imperialism. In class, we're going to be looking at these two pictures and analyzing them. But on the picture on the left, you see America and the flag wrapping around the world, kind of showing this world dominance, world power. The picture on the right is actually showing you this guy right here, Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam is an image, motif, a symbol, and basically a representation. It represents the United States. He also represents the federal government. So you're going to see Uncle Sam a lot in these images. Look for the hat, look for the face and the beard, look for the suit, the stars and the stripes, the red, white, and blue colors if they have color. But Uncle Sam definitely is going to be drawn a lot. He's a continual theme used in political cartoons, in propaganda. But make sure you notice how he's being drawn, because you guys know this picture of him. It's actually from a propaganda poster telling you that I want you for the U.S. Army, you know? But he's going to be drawn in a lot of different ways. So make sure you take note. Does he look old? Does he look young? Does he look weak? Does he look strong? Nothing is drawn by accident. So when we talk about imperialism, in this picture on the left, we see this Uncle Sam map of the United States of America, and he's actually eating Cuba. Now, I don't know about you, but when a country eats another country, usually that has a negative connotation, meaning that, I don't know, maybe they don't want to be eaten. But this is actually a political cartoon of imperialism. This is the technical definition: when stronger nations extend their economic, political, and military control over weaker territories. So make sure you get that definition down. In this picture, Uncle Sam is eating Cuba. Uncle Sam, America, is taking over Cuba. And the person who drew this picture had a very negative view of that because, again, eating somebody is usually not a great thing. Imperialism can take a lot of forms. There can be political imperialism, where our country politically takes over another country. Economic imperialism. We economically take over another country. We're only doing it for trade benefits. There's also cultural imperialism, which is the idea that we are taking over someone else's culture. We are expanding America's influence, and we are culturally taking over that nation. But here, keep in mind, underline these two words in your definition. Underline stronger and weaker. This is key for imperialism. It usually only happens, obviously, when a stronger nation takes over a weaker nation. And I don't know if you caught this, but America now is technically a strong nation. But why is America doing this? Because imperialism does come with risks. You risk making your people mad. You risk conflict and war. You risk taking over the wrong areas. But why is America willing to risk that? Why is America changing into an imperialistic country? Number one, we have this vision for our country that we will have a strong military. We hope that one day, in the 1890s, we hope that our military would be everywhere, that our country would be protected, and that the rest of the world would know that we are on top. We have the strongest military. In the 1890s, the area of the military that we were most concerned about was our Navy. We wanted our Navy to be the strongest in the world. We wanted ports all around the world. We wanted a presence around the world. Again, to protect our country, but also to send a message to the rest of the world that we are strong. Number two, we want new markets. America can only grow certain things. America only has certain resources. And right now, we only have certain countries that we are trading with. So if we expand our horizons, if we expand the people that we're interacting with, the countries we're interacting with, then we can create new trade partners. We can also find new raw materials. They might be the same raw materials that we have in America, but if there's more of them somewhere else, then definitely we want to economically bank off of that. Number three is potentially the hardest one to swallow for some of you. I know some of you guys kind of well, I think I know you well. So I think some of you are not going to like this last point. But others of you might be able to understand this last point. The last reason why America is taking over other territories or other countries is this idea of cultural superiority. To be superior means to be better. So this idea of our culture is better. America is better. It can be shown in a lot of different forms. It honestly can be shown in a good way if America is genuinely helping another country. That could be cultural superiority. Things in your country are hurting you. Why don't you try it like us in America? That might help you. But of course, are there areas that are uncomfortable where America steps on another country and just says, this is mine, America is better, your country's not. Yeah, that does happen. So cultural superiority is definitely a motivation. This idea that, it goes back all the way to when we interacted with Native Americans. We thought our culture was better than the Native American culture. It goes back to manifest destiny, when we thought God gave us this destiny to take over North America. I don't know if you remember, but other countries and Native Americans lived in that land, but we thought our culture was better. We thought we were superior, and we took over that land. Well, take that same idea, and that is what is happening around the world. So let's dive in. This is your one slide on Alaska, so make sure that you get the information down. I know many of you guys, if you grew up seeing United States maps, you might have seen Alaska kind of be shoved up on the top left-hand corner. Maybe you thought it was near Oregon and Washington, because when you look at it like a school map, they have to put Alaska down there so you can see it. But Alaska is actually pretty far north. Canada separates us from Alaska. It's mostly frozen ice. Again, very, very far north. So when you look at Alaska in this map, I hope you're asking, why the heck did we get this? How did we get this land? Whoa, Alaska's huge. I had no idea Alaska was that far up. Well, if we zoom back actually to 1867, this is actually during Reconstruction, we get our first little taste of imperialism. We just bought Alaska. So this is still imperialism. We purchased. We don't have to kill people to take over land. We purchased this property from Russia for $7.2 million. The person who negotiated and thought of this deal was William Stewart. But at the time, everyone hated this idea. In fact, some people called it Steward's folly, which basically means steward's mistake. People thought it was a frozen wasteland. Well, luckily for Stewart, it was very rich in resources: gold, timber, and a lot of oil. It also is a good strategic location to Russia. It's closer to Russia than the other parts of the United States of America. If you're wondering why I have number 1 and number 2 listed, it goes back to this, what you wrote in your notes. Every time we take over a territory, I want you to put in your notes why we're taking over that territory. Is it military? Is it new markets? Is it cultural superiority? In this case, the new markets is the resources, so put a number 2 next to it. Strategic location to Russia, of course, is military, so put a number 1 next to it. Okay, also in your maps that you see in school sometimes, you see Hawaii. Hawaii is not super close to us. Yes, it's really that far away. I don't even think this map does justice to it, but why the heck this little island in the middle of the ocean, why did we take it? Why is it a state? What is the story? Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's go back in time. This is a lot, so pause it, get all the information down, and then you can listen to me talk about it, or you can listen to me talk and write, but usually that doesn't work out because usually your brain has a hard time focusing on both. Okay, Hawaii's annexation story. Sorry, annexation, in case you don't know, means you're adding it to something larger. In this case, America is adding Hawaii to their country. In the mid-1800s, American sugar plantations made up 3/4 of Hawaii's wealth. So what this is saying is in the mid-1800s, there are a bunch of sugar plantations that are actually controlled by American people. And this is making Hawaii actually very wealthy. But most of it, again, is going to American sugar plantation people. In fact, by 1900, foreigners, aka Americans, and immigrants, aka Americans, outnumbered native Hawaiians 3-1. So this is interesting. 3-1. That means there are more American immigrants in this Hawaiian island than there are native Hawaiians. In 1890, there was actually a tariff, and this is very important to our story. In America, we made a tariff that raised import rates on foreign sugar. A tariff is a tax on imports. So that means anything coming into our country from another country is getting taxed. Well, Hawaii is a different country. So the sugar that these American sugar plantation people are making is now getting taxed heavily. This is hurting those people in Hawaii, the American people in Hawaii, because they're getting taxed more than anyone else just because their sugar plantation is in another country. So they have the grand idea, a grand scheme. If Hawaii were to be annexed by the United States, then they could avoid the tariff. If Hawaii was a part of America, then they wouldn't have to follow these economic tax tariff laws. So, what did these people do who have the majority influence in Hawaii? These white businessmen, led by a guy named Dole, forced the monarchy in Hawaii to sign a new constitution. So through intimidation, through force, through there's more of us than there are of you, they forced the monarchy to sign a certain constitution, the Bayonet Constitution. What it basically does is it gives the voting power to people who own land in Hawaii. But who owns land in Hawaii? All these American white businessmen. So who has the power now? Who can vote out the monarchy now? Who can take control now? These white American businessmen. Another piece to our story in Hawaii is in 1887, the United States pressured Hawaii to allow the US to build a Navy base on their island. So, you know this, right? Pearl Harbor is in Hawaii. That's where we put a Navy base. Why? Look at this map. The star is not perfect, and obviously the star is not the size of Hawaii. Guys, I just put a star where Hawaii roughly is, but look how strategic Hawaii is placed. This island is not random. There's the sugar stuff going on. There's also this. What a great spot to put a Navy is what our government is thinking. What a great spot to refuel our ships. What a great strategic spot for Asia, that's China right there, for Russia. This is a great location for our benefit, again, military reasons. Well, here's the end of the story. In case you didn't catch it, Hawaii was its own country. It had its own monarchy. A new queen came up, and she basically was trying to reclaim Hawaii. America had not taken it over yet, but she already knew that this was in place. So her campaign, her thing, was Hawaii is for Hawaiians. This obviously caused a revolution to happen with those American businessmen. Marines were sent to assist the American businessmen, and they overthrew the government. They kicked out the queen, they kicked out the monarchy, and there were people in government, people in the military that were supporting this revolution. However, there was one person who did not agree with what was happening. That happened to be the president at the time. President Cleveland was not going to annex Hawaii unless a majority of Hawaiians agreed, which they didn't. So President Cleveland, throughout the rest of his term, he did not annex Hawaii. Now, he's not perfect. He still let this stuff happen with the Marines. He still let people overthrow this queen. But he's basically saying, I'm not going to take over Hawaii unless the Hawaiians want to be taken over. Well, Cleveland ended his presidency. He served his time, and we got a new president. That new president's name is William McKinley, the most imperialistic president of all of them. McKinley, one of the first things he did was say, we're annexing Hawaii. Hawaii is now a territory, and the people in Hawaii do not get a vote. We have taken it over. Now look, in 1898, Hawaii is a territory. That means that America has control and influence in that area, but they don't get the benefits of being actually a part of America. It's not until 1959 that Hawaii officially becomes a state. Now they're incorporated fully into our country. They have representatives, they have representation, they have federal funding, state funding. Now they're supported. But for about 60 or so years, they're left in this weird limbo of we're controlled by America, but we don't get the benefits as much from America. So, why did we take over Hawaii? Number one. This is not like number one, like I'm just writing a random list. This goes back to the reasons. Remember the 3 reasons? Number 1, we wanted a Navy base, military strength. Number 2, new markets. That's sugar. Number 3, cultural superiority. We can overthrow your monarchy. So, ladies and gentlemen, the 2 biggest ones right now as we see is Alaska and Hawaii. Maybe something to be thinking about is why did we buy Alaska and why did we forcibly take over Hawaii? Why didn't we just negotiate with the Hawaiian leaders? Aren't there Native Alaskans? Yes. What are their thoughts about when they just got bought by America? Did they rise up too? Again, these topics are loaded, these topics are big, and if you want to research it more for extra credit, you totally can. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the next topic we're going to talk about is the Spanish-American War. This is a very quick war, but this is a huge moment for imperialism. Look at the time when we took Hawaii, 1898. It's the same year that this war is going to happen. When you're writing your notes, make sure that you're writing the causes and effects of this war. I'll try to make it obvious, but if you have any questions, you can definitely email me. What caused this war and what were the effects? Okay, this is the causes. This war actually started with America not even being involved. Look at the first bullet point. This was actually a deal with Cuba and Spain. This was a situation, a conflict, where Cuba actually wanted independence from Spain. Just like we wanted independence from England, Cuba wants independence from Spain. Some Americans, America's just watching this conflict happen. Some Americans think that we should support Spain. Some Americans think we should support Cuba. Some Americans say we should mind our own business and not get involved at all. But the moral of the story here is that the issue starts with Cuba versus Spain. And America's just kind of sitting, saying, do we want to get involved? And if so, who do we want to support? And then did I do good on my sound effects? I should have actually used real ones. Okay. Out of nowhere, boom, wake up one morning, one of our Navy ships was exploded. Look at these little sailor guy. That's actually insensitive. Sorry. Those little people are dead. But one of our Navy ships was exploded. What? Over 200 people died. Where was this Navy ship? It was near Cuba. Cuba couldn't have attacked us. They didn't have the means and the power to do that. But you know who could have? Spain. So, ladies and gentlemen, we get our first glimpse of fake news. So, they actually have their own title. They're called yellow journalists. This is a vocabulary term. Make sure you write this down. Yellow journalists. They exaggerate the news. They are meant to lure readers in and enrage them about issues. They think of these crazy, unique titles to get people to buy their newspapers, to read their articles, and they try to exaggerate the little truth that they might have. So what's the little truth that they have? Is that the USS Maine was exploded and sunk. They know that people died. They know that a ship blew up. Where did they exaggerate? They blamed it on Spain. we actually don't really know why this happened. The most recent historical thought is that it was an internal failure on the ship. A ship can explode on its own. But these journalists said that it was Spain. Look at the article on the left. Look at what's in all caps in the center. Destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy, aka it's Spain's fault. Look what else yellow journalists did. The thing on the right. It says what the Senator Proctor saw in Cuba. They're making the situation in Cuba sound so dire, so intense. Look how Spain is treating these Cubans. The oppressed Cubans, they claimed, were suffering at the hands of European tyrants, just as the United States had done before in the American Revolution. They're basically saying, look how much they're suffering. Shouldn't we get involved? So you combine these two things together. Spain has attacked us, and we should help these innocent, weak Cubans. That leads to America declaring war on Spain. So, technically, America declared war on Spain on April 11th, 1898. But a lot of people immediately thought within the government, are we only going to war to Spain to take over Cuba? Because Cuba wants to be independent. So if we enter this war, are we really just going to this war so that we would take over Cuba? Because that's kind of messed up. So what Congress did to make sure that that was crystal clear that that was not a motivation, they passed an amendment, the Teller Amendment, which basically says that the United States would help the Cuban people gain their freedom from Spain, but are not going to annex them after victory. So they're making it really clear to the American people, to the government, to the world, that we are entering this war, we are against Spain, we are helping Cuba, but we're not doing it just to take over Cuba. Interesting. America enters the war against Spain. Okay. Something interesting about this war. We are declaring war on Spain, but we will never fight in Spain. Let me say that again. We are declaring war on Spain, but we are never fighting in Spain. We fight Spanish troops in all of these areas that they control. You should be asking yourself why. We are fighting Spain in all of these territories that Spain has control over. Why would we do that? You'll figure it out soon, I believe. Okay, so we first fight Spain in the Philippines. Spain controls the Philippines at this point. This is another country, in case you don't know. And you know what's crazy about this? The Filipinos also want independence from Spain. How convenient. So basically, we land in the Philippines, we fight with the Filipinos, we fight against Spain, and then boom, Spain surrenders. Check. Then we go to Cuba, and Spain surrenders. Check. And as a result, the United States annex, not Cuba, but Puerto Rico and what? Guam? Yeah, Puerto Rico and Guam just kind of get thrown in as territories that we're like, and we'll take these two. So, ladies and gentlemen, what the freak just happened? This war is already over. Yeah. Spain had this massive empire that they were kind of losing control over, in case you didn't catch this. Spain was not fully in this war. Spain was not really caring about this war. Spain didn't really understand why this war was happening fully. So, regardless, maybe they were just super unprepared, but this was a very, very quick war. But look what has happened. The Philippines, again, we fought with them. Spain surrendered. Cubans, we didn't take them over. In the Treaty of Paris, where we are saying that Spain lost and America won, we basically are saying, and we want Puerto Rico and Guam. Spain had control over them, and we are taking control now. Weird, interesting, imperialism. We are actually going to take over the Philippines too. Spoiler. I bet you already guessed that. We're not going to take over Cuba. We promised we wouldn't, but we are going to take over the Philippines. But I wanted you guys to see this quote by our president. This is a justification for imperialism. When being asked why he was taking over the Philippines, this is what he said. That there was nothing left for us to do but to take them all, the Philippine Islands, and to educate the Filipinos and uplift them and Christianize them. There was nothing left for us to do but to take them all. It's our duty to educate them, to uplift them, to Christianize them. Which one of these motivations are ringing in your head right now? Does this sound like military strength? Does this sound like new markets? Does this sound like cultural superiority? If you're thinking the last one, this is screaming cultural superiority. That's why I put this quote in here. Ladies and gentlemen, the Philippines, most Filipinos are Catholic. That's in the background of their culture. Their culture is very Catholic, very Christian. So there's just like flat out lying happening here where we think it's our duty to Christianize this other culture. But joke's on you, McKinley, that culture already has Catholic Christian basis. But yes, this is a justification. This is what people thought. This is what people still think, that it is our duty to help other cultures. But the way we're helping sometimes gets a little messy. And in this case, McKinley is trying to tell the American people it's our duty as the stronger nation to help out, educate, uplift this group of people. Now, if they want to be helped, that's one thing. But you'll see later, the Filipinos do not want to be helped. Okay, Treaty of Paris. This is the treaty that ended the Spanish-American War. Basically, what it says is that Spain lost, America won, and Puerto Rico and Guam get moved over to America's annexation. So America gets that territory, those territories. But let me tell you the reasons why Americans were against this treaty. Make sure you get all of this down. The first thing is that Americans are like noticing that, wait, we're annexing. Okay, they gave us Puerto Rico and Guam. That's part of the negotiation, but Filipinos don't want to be annexed. They've made that very clear. Do we even have the right to just annex the Philippines? Second bullet point, they think that this treaty violates the Declaration of Independence. Do you remember the Declaration of Independence and how it's built on this idea of self-government, that we think that we deserve to govern ourselves, that England is being oppressive, is being a tyrant? Are we doing the same thing to these countries? If we're not letting them self-govern, isn't that an issue with what the core of America is? Some people, third bullet point, think that we need to settle race relations here before taking on problems elsewhere. Booker T. Washington is actually a very famous anti-imperialist person, and he was like, we have our own issues here. We still have segregation. We still have lynchings. We still have racial issues. Why are we taking over other countries and adding their problems onto our plate? We already have a very full plate. And the last one is an economic reason why people don't like this. They think that specifically Filipino immigrants, but all of these immigrants, all these people that we're annexing, what if they flood into America? They will be a competition for American jobs. So these are all the reasons why Americans maybe didn't like this treaty, but this might shock you. Most Americans liked imperialism. Maybe that doesn't shock you. Most of the government and most Americans at this time period, they do like imperialism. Because guys, our country is getting stronger. Our country does have a stronger military strength. Our country is getting economically stronger. People may not like the cultural superiority, but the first two, There's a lot of Americans that really like this, and I don't blame them, right? Don't you want to feel strong and protected? Don't you want a country that's on top? Don't you want to live in a country that isn't struggling economically? So, imperialism, maybe you don't like the ways we are getting these countries, but maybe you like the benefits that imperialism does bring. Political cartoons are super important for this time period. I'm actually going to stop this video here. I'm going to do this video in 2 parts. So the second part, we will start on this political cartoon right here. Be analyzing it. Here we go.